Well, the figures are in. Fury versus Ngannou was a total flop financially. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome to On Me Edson. I hope you're all well. If you like what I do here, don't forget to like and share the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell for all future videos. So the pay-per-view figures have been released, or partially released, for the Tyson Fury against Francis Ngannou fight last weekend that took place in Saudi Arabia. So far, all we know is that for the US, there was a little over 67,000 pay-per-view buys. That's 56,000 on ESPN and 11,500 over TV, spread over TV rights. So that's just over 67,000. So that generates an income of about 5,300,000 and change, which is not a lot when you consider how much this cost to put on. Was it a flop? Or was this what we really expected? Was this fight ever going to generate that kind of enthusiasm to want to go and spend? Well, in the United States, it was, what, nearly $80. And in other parts of the world, obviously, be a lot less, according to local currencies. Well, if we look at the fight itself, nobody gave Francis Ngannou any chance at all. So from that point of view, it was never really regarded or expected to be a competitive fight. If it's not a competitive fight, then you're probably asking yourself, well, why would I want to pay for like an exhibition fight? There's interest there, but not really. And I kind of said this in a previous video as well. There was kind of interest there from my point of view, but not really enough to want to pay for it and gladly pay for it. But if we just take Saudi Arabia out of the equation for now, reportedly Francis Ngannou was getting about $10 million. I believe it was dollars for this fight. Tyson Fury, I believe, I could be corrected, so let me know in the comments here, but I believe he was getting in the region of about $30 million for this fight. So just between the two fighters, the two camps, they were going to cost the event $40 million. But the pay-per-view sales alone in the United States only came to just over $5 million. Now, to generate $40 million in pay-per-view sales on the US price this is, you would have to sell just over 500,000 pay-per-view sales, which is an incredible amount given the type of event that it was. Now, what hasn't been released are the global sales so far. Now, Saudi Arabia have already come out in defense. Usyk has already come out and said, no, you've got to consider the global sales. And it's absolutely right. He's absolutely right there. It's not just the US sales. A lot of these YouTube channels are just going off what happened in the United States, whether it's bombed, whether it's failed, whether it's flopped, whatever term you want to call it, or whether it was expected. It was never really going to sell in the United States because, one, it happened either in morning or early afternoon, depending on which side of the country you lived. And was there the real desire to want to go and pay for this event as well? So from the American and the Canadian point of view, you would say, yeah, it wasn't really much of a big seller, and it wasn't expected to be. However, globally, you could say, well, yeah, no, it's going to generate a lot of views. But how many people would be watching this or willing to pay for this on a global scale? Now, would it ever reach in the region of about 500,000 just to cover the cost of the two fighters, let alone the cost of the event itself? Now, the cost of the event itself, which is very lavish, a grand affair, I would say if that cost anything less than $10 million, I think they're doing well, given the grand nature of it. And let's not forget that they also had to build the staging as well. They had to build the venue as well. So therefore, this could have cost millions and millions more. But let's just say, just to host the event, $10 million. Plus the fees on the fighters, that's another $40 million, so $50 million. Well, you need to sell over 500,000 pay-per-views just to get the $40 million. So you're talking in the region about 700,000 pay-per-views just to break even. Now, of course, the traditional pay-per-view figures don't really apply here, you would say, because it's all being bankrolled by Saudi Arabia. And let's not forget, Saudi Arabia, their main goal here is obviously to generate interest in the event itself and to become a big player in sports events hosting, of course, all around the world. But what they're doing is drawing attention to their country. They're trying to draw attention into their economy, their way of life, and so on and so forth. So for them, investing in these kinds of events is more of a big PR move, a big tourism move, a big demonstration of wealth, rather than it having to make economic sense. Regardless of what The likes of Turkey Al-Sheikh will tell us, or tell the media, say, no, this is paid for itself, let's say. No, you've got to consider the global pay-per-views on this. Really, we know that this event is going to be made at a loss, and they know it's going to be made at a loss because their main objective here is just to throw money at an event so that it generates interest and attraction to Saudi Arabia itself. So it's not really about the event, it's not really about the fighters, it's more about them putting money to host an event so it draws attention to them as a nation. And that's exactly what it did. And they've done exactly the same in football, trying to raise the profile of their football league by bringing in the likes of Ronaldo and other high-profile players, giving them vast amounts of money, millions upon millions per every season, to generate interest in their national league, but also generate interest in their national team as well. And also on the back of the football and also on the back of boxing, to bring the World Cup to Saudi Arabia, to bring the Olympics to Saudi Arabia and other major events to Saudi Arabia. It's all about bringing events there and bringing the focus to the country itself. So whether the pay-per-view bombed, flopped or not, or whether as it was expected, it's not really the issue. What is the issue, however, is whether this can be repeated again, and whether it will be repeated over and over again, and whether this ruins the perception or the expectation for future events that are not held in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Okay, let's just take Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou again. The only place that they can have that fight again is in Saudi Arabia. Even though now there is a higher expectation of a competitive fight with Francis Ngannou against Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, whichever boxer he chooses to go up against. There's a greater expectation now that he's going to do a lot better in those other fights. Therefore, there's going to be a greater expectation to sell pay-per-view on those fights, just on name recognition alone. Francis Ngannou is going to fight. He's going to fight Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder. So this is more of a legitimate contest. There is legitimacy because there is history there. There's also form there. We know what Francis Ngannou is like now in a boxing ring. We know what the other heavyweights are like. So now we can see if there's going to be a real contest. That adds intrigue. That adds excitement. That adds the incentive for people to go and want to pay to watch these fights on pay-per-view, of course. But if we're talking about these fights here, then the logical place for these to be fought is in Saudi Arabia. Because even if they don't sell well on pay-per-view, you've always got the Saudi Arabia who are willing to pump money into these fights for the overall grand scheme of attracting eyes onto Saudi Arabia itself and not necessarily onto the event itself. Okay, let's just say that's one more fight. One more fight, it will go to Saudi Arabia. But what we expect to see are more fights with Francis Ngannou against the Deontay Wilders of this world, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, maybe Usyk as well, to see if he's going to be able to rise up to the expectation to possibly what a lot of people now think. But even if the global pay-per-views double, they're still going to be wanting 10, 15, 20 million on Francis Ngannou's side and possibly 30, 40, 50 million on the other fighters' side. So they're going to have to sell even more pay-per-views on a global scale. And possibly that's not going to work. The expectation now is way too much. The expectation now of all the fighters to deliver a competitive fight is way too much. But also the expectation now that, hey, we're going to be able to sell lots and lots of pay-per-views over the world. It's just not going to work. It's just unfeasible to expect that these kinds of contests now, without anything on the line, is going to generate that much interest. Okay, what about the knock-on effect for Tyson Fury against Usyk? Well, now, based upon Tyson Fury's last outing, his performance, the questions are being asked, well, is there actually any interest in the Fury-Usyk fight? Now, if you ask boxing fans, yes, there is. But amongst global combat sports fans, possibly not that much. Possibly they're thinking, well, Tyson Fury's been found out. Usyk didn't really have a great outing last time against Dubois. Is boxing all that? Why should we pay for this? Let's just stick with MMA, or let's just stick with other boxing contests that are more competitive and are either free to watch or part of a sports package that you might already be paying for, or the pay-per-views cost a lot less. So there might be an interest, a pay-per-view interest. a business model to be had just for one more Francis Ngannou fight. And there might be just enough interest in the Tyson Fury-Usyk fight as long as it's bankrolled by Saudi Arabia. But if you're going to take these fights outside of Saudi Arabia now and bring them back to the UK or the United States or wherever. Eddie Hearn was saying if we have Ngannou against AJ, it could be in Africa and it'll be Rumble in the Jungle too. What an absolute load of nonsense. Where is the money going to come from to generate that kind of interest in Africa and also to have a global sales? That would be a hard sell. So it's either going to have to be in the UK, where obviously AJ would have a massive following, or in the United States, where AJ also has a massive following as well. Eddie Hearn knows this. Eddie Hearn knows that possibly the only fighter out there on a global scale that can generate enough pay-per-view to make it pay for itself outside of Saudi Arabia is AJ against Ngannou. Inside Saudi Arabia, well, it doesn't really matter what pay-per-view sales are because, hey, Saudi Arabia are going to pay for it. But the point is, what's the next fight after that? If it's a poor fight, if Francis Ngannou gets beat and gets beat convincingly, let's say, by AJ, Deontay Wilder, that kind of thing, then all of a sudden the business model just dies. There's nothing there. There's no asset to sell. There's nothing in Francis Ngannou to sell anymore. There's no asset in any other boxer fighting Ngannou because there's nothing on the line. So effectively now they've hit a bit of a bump in the road. Well, it's a very large bump in the road. It's almost like they've hit a brick wall, financially speaking, because all of a sudden they've got to try and generate interest and a business model for another 3 or 4 fights. But unless they're always going to be held in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia are going to want to pay for that, then it won't be profitable elsewhere. Or they're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis, on a fight-by-fight basis, and see how it plays out. The only people who are going to win out of this, if they demand a flat fee for each fight, are the fighters themselves. If Ngannou says, I'll only fight for another $15 million, if AJ says, I'll only fight for another $20, $25 million, okay, fine, that'll work. And maybe the next fight after that, Ngannou will say, I'll have another 15 million. Deontay Wilder say, no, I'll have another 20 million. Okay, fine. But as long as that's being paid for by Saudi, that's absolutely fine. But if promoters like Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren and Queensberry, Top Rank, whichever promotion company it is, if they're having to rely on the pay-per-view sales to pay for this event and pay the fighters, it's not going to work. If the fighters are told you're not going to get a flat fee, you're going to get points on a pay-per-view, then their net return income could be a lot less. This is what happened with AJ in his last fight when he fought Helenius. He was on for a pay-per-view fight, but all of a sudden, because of what happened, he had to find Helenius at short notice and therefore couldn't sell the fight on DAZN, Eddie Hearn. Therefore, it just went free to air. He had to accept a lot less. Now, another fighter may have just said, no, the fight is off. But credit to AJ, he carried on with the fight. He took the fight and he accepted a much lesser purse just so that he could have another fight and continue on this kind of road to regain a world championship, if that is ever possible. But the next few months are going to be very interesting, not only in terms of Tyson Fury against Usyk and how willing Saudi Arabia are willing to pay for it, but also Francis Ngannou and every other top-level heavyweight, where they go next. And do they abandon the Saudi model and just get back to realistic figures, business model figures, and whether we as the boxing fandom or the MMA fandom, whether we're going to be willing to pay the $30, $40, $50, $80, whatever it is, pounds, shekels, whatever it is, to watch a fight that we may or may not be interested in? Or are we much more likely to go and pay $40 just to watch a fight that we're really interested in and also watch an undercard that is stacked as well? So very interesting now what happens now in the future based upon the poor sales, the poor global sales from the pay-per-view of Tyson Fury against Ngannou. I would imagine at a global level, I would say no more than 250,000 pay-per-views. Now, by some standards, of course, that would be a great figure. But when we take into account the amount of money that was paid for this and paid to the fighters, it doesn't look so good afterwards. If you're talking about an overall event, you're talking just for the fighters, you're talking 500,000 pay-per-views. If you're talking about the whole event, you're probably talking about 600 to 700,000 pay-per-views. If you're talking about trying to cover all costs here of building the venue as well, of all the infrastructure from Saudi just to generate this event, you're probably talking 1 million, 1.5 million pay-per-views just to get anywhere near it. And even then, I don't think that's going to do it. So the event itself is way off on a financial point of view. And this is what the promoters are probably kind of scratching their heads about right now. As long as Saudi pay for it, there's money to be made and there's an event that they can put on. If there's no money coming from Saudi Arabia, they have to go back to the traditional US, Las Vegas, one of the football stadiums in the UK, let's say, and then all of a sudden be able to generate a pay-per-view based upon that, but it's going to be a lot less. We're talking 1 to 2 million, possibly maximum for each fighter, maybe 3 or 4 million for each fighter, which is a substantial drop in what they're currently getting now. Anyway, let us know your thoughts here on this. It's a huge topic, but it's very interesting that the pay-per-view figures have just come out right now. And that really determines what's going to happen in the future and also what level of interest there might be for the future as well. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you like what I do here, don't forget to like and share, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications bell, and I'll catch you again on another video coming very soon. Bye now.